In the lively village of Amigbo, surrounded by lush green forests and flowing rivers, lived a young woman named Adana. She was the pride of the village, a brilliant, hard-working girl who had excelled in her studies from childhood to university. Everyone admired her determination, and her success became a source of hope for the community. The day of her university graduation was a grand occasion. The village square was decorated with colourful cloths, music filled the air, and people from near and far gathered to celebrate. Women danced, men clapped, and children played around excitedly. Among the crowd was Mama Amara, a neighbour known for her charm and generosity. She had been close to Adana's family for years, often bringing small gifts and helping out during family events, but hidden behind Mama Amara's friendly face was a jealous heart filled with darkness. Mama Amara had her reasons for envy. While Adana shone brightly, Mama Amara's children struggled to succeed. Her eldest son had dropped out of school, her second-born failed repeatedly, and her youngest showed no interest in learning. She watched Adana's success with bitterness, hiding her true feelings behind a fake smile. On the day of Adana's graduation, Mama Amara approached her with a special gift, a small box wrapped in shiny gold paper. "Adana, my dear," she said with a wide smile, "I am so proud of you. You deserve this." Inside the box was a stunning necklace with a pendant shaped like a snake, its eyes glittering like tiny emeralds. "Wear it always," Mama Amara continued. "It will bring you luck and protection." Adana, overwhelmed by the love and support of the day, thanked Mama Amara sincerely. She put on the necklace without hesitation, unaware of the evil hidden in the gift. From the moment Adana wore the necklace, her life began to change. At first, the changes were small, things she dismissed as coincidence. Her phone interviews would suddenly get cancelled. Employers who seemed impressed during interviews would go silent. The rejection letters began to pile up, each one cutting deeper into her confidence. Months turned into years, and Adana remained jobless despite her excellent qualifications. Her once bright future seemed to dim, and whispers began to circulate in the village. People who once admired her began to question her abilities. "She must be doing something wrong," they said. "Maybe she's not as smart as we thought." Adana's struggles affected her deeply. She became withdrawn, her cheerful laughter replaced by long periods of silence. She started avoiding public gatherings, unable to face the pitying looks and whispered conversations. The necklace Mama Amara gave her wasn't just an ordinary piece of jewelry. It was cursed, designed to block Adana's progress and tie her to a life of frustration and rejection. The snake-shaped pendant carried a dark spirit, feeding on Adana's hopes and dreams. Unseen to the human eye, the necklace created a heavy spiritual barrier around her. Wherever she went, people felt uneasy without knowing why. Employers would lose interest in her without explanation, and relationships would fall apart before they even began. Adana's life wasn't the only one affected. The necklace also brought trouble to her family. Her father, once a strong and healthy man, began to fall ill with no clear diagnosis. Her mother's small business started failing, with customers disappearing one by one. Even her younger siblings began struggling in school, their once promising futures clouded with failure. Over time, strange events began to occur. Adana often felt an unusual heaviness around her neck, as though the necklace grew heavier each day. She started having vivid nightmares, where she saw snakes crawling all over her body. In these dreams, she would try to scream, but her voice would fail. During one sleepless night, she removed the necklace and placed it on her bedside table. But the next morning, it was back around her neck as though it had never been taken off. Confused and frightened, Adana dismissed it as her imagination, not realizing the depth of the curse she was dealing with. Mama Amara's evil didn't stop with Adana. Over the years, she had given gifts to many people, each one carrying a curse. A young couple, whose wedding she attended, divorced within a year. Mama Amara had given them a beautifully carved statue as a wedding gift, and the couple's happiness faded soon after. They fought constantly, and their once loving relationship crumbled into bitterness. A promising businessman who received a set of cooking pots from her saw his flourishing palm oil business destroyed by mysterious fires that broke out in his storage facility. A family celebrating a child's birth received a decorative mirror from her. Soon after, the baby fell seriously ill, and doctors couldn't find the cause. Each tragedy seemed disconnected, but those who looked closely began to notice a pattern. Mama Amara was always there, always with a gift, and always smiling. In the deeply religious village of Amagbo, many people suspected that something was wrong, but no one dared to confront Mama Amara. She was a prominent member of the church choir, known for her angelic voice and her habit of donating generously during church events. She led prayers and delivered inspiring testimonies, making it nearly impossible for anyone to accuse her of wrongdoing. But behind closed doors, Mama Amara was a servant of darkness. At night, she conducted rituals in her compound, summoning spirits and strengthening the curses she had placed on her victims. Her house, though ordinary by day, became a place of eerie lights and strange sounds at night. Years of rejection and misfortune took their toll on Adana. Her once bright spirit faded, replaced by a heavy sadness that seemed impossible to shake. The villagers who had once celebrated her success now pitied her. She had so much potential, they would say, shaking their heads. It's a shame her life turned out this way. Little did they know, Adana's struggles were not her fault. She was the victim of a spiritual battle she couldn't see, a fight for her destiny that had been stolen by the cursed gift of a jealous neighbor. Adana's days blurred into endless cycles of frustration and hopelessness. By now, she had become a shadow of her former self. She stopped attending village events, barely left her family's compound, and often sat staring at the necklace around her neck. It felt like a weight she could not escape, both physically and emotionally. One evening, after yet another rejection letter arrived, her mother, Mama Nkechi, approached her. "Adana, my child," she said softly, sitting beside her. "This isn't normal. You're hardworking, you're brilliant. There's no reason for all these problems. We need to seek answers." Adana nodded silently. Deep down, she had felt for a long time that her misfortunes were more than just bad luck. She remembered the odd moments, the strange dreams, the heavy feeling around her neck, and how people often treated her strangely for no apparent reason. But she didn't know where to begin. That night, Adana had a dream so vivid it felt real. She was standing in an open field, surrounded by thick mist. Suddenly, she saw Mama Amara approaching her, but something was different. As she drew closer, her smile stretched unnaturally wide, and her body began to change. Her legs merged into a scaly tail, and her arms turned into the coils of a snake. "You'll never escape me, Adana," Mama Amara hissed, her voice echoing like thunder. "You're mine now." Adana woke up screaming, her body drenched in sweat. Her mother rushed to her side, alarmed. "What happened?" Mama Nkechi asked, holding her daughter tightly. Adana couldn't explain it fully, but for the first time, she spoke of the strange feelings she had been experiencing. Her mother listened carefully, then whispered, "It's the necklace, Adana. Something is not right with that necklace. We must seek help." The next day, Mama Nkechi took Adana to see Pastor Obinna, a well-known preacher from a neighboring village who was visiting Amagbo for a revival. Pastor Obinna was a man known for his spiritual discernment and fiery prayers. When they arrived, the pastor asked Adana to kneel as he prayed over her. As he laid his hands on her, he suddenly stopped and looked at her intensely. "Child, there's something you're carrying," he said, "something that does not belong to you." Adana's heart raced. "The necklace?" she asked hesitantly, touching the pendant. "Yes," Pastor Obinna replied. "That necklace is not an ordinary gift. It carries a curse meant to block your blessings and tie your destiny to darkness. Who gave it to you?" "Mama Amara," Adana whispered, her voice trembling. Pastor Obinna's face darkened. "That woman," he said firmly, "is no friend to your family. She is an agent of darkness, hiding in plain sight. She has done this to many others, but her time of deception is coming to an end." The pastor explained that the necklace was tied to Adana's spirit, and simply removing it wouldn't break the curse. A deliverance session would be needed, one that would expose the powers behind Mama Amara's wicked deeds. But the process wouldn't be easy. Pastor Obinna warned them that confronting such deep spiritual forces could provoke retaliation. "She will fight back," he said, "but we must not be afraid. The truth will set you free." Back in the village, Mama Amara began to feel uneasy. She couldn't explain it, but she sensed that something was stirring. Her rituals, which once brought her strength and power, no longer felt as effective. The dark spirits she served seemed restless, and she often found herself waking in the middle of the night with a sense of foreboding. One evening, as she sat in her dimly lit room surrounded by her ritual items, her eldest son, Chuka, walked in. "Mother," he said cautiously, "people are talking about you." Mama Amara stiffened. "What are they saying?" "Some are saying you bring bad luck," Chuka whispered, avoiding her gaze. "They're talking about your gifts and how bad things happen to people who receive them." Mama Amara's eyes narrowed. "Fools," she spat. "They don't know what they're saying." But deep down, she knew the walls were closing in. By now, rumors about Mama Amara had begun spreading through Amegbo. People started connecting the dots. The tragedies that followed her gifts, the strange happenings around her house at night, and her overly friendly nature that always seemed too good to be true. One woman, Ijoma, spoke up during a village meeting. "Have you noticed how every family she visits ends up in trouble?" Ijoma said. "My brother's business collapsed after she gave him those pots. My cousin's marriage didn't last a year after her so-called blessing at their wedding." Others murmured in agreement. The village was beginning to see Mama Amara for who she truly was, but fear kept them from confronting her openly. Meanwhile, Adana prepared herself for the deliverance session. The pastor had advised her to fast and pray, but doubt lingered in her heart. Could this really be the end of her struggles? Could she finally break free from the invisible chains that had held her back for so long? As she knelt in prayer that night, she felt a surge of determination. "This is not my destiny," she whispered to herself. "I will not let this darkness define my life." But unknown to her, Mama Amara had begun her own preparations. She could feel the spiritual forces aligning against her, and she wasn't ready to give up her grip on Adana or the village without a fight. The day of the deliverance session arrived. Adana, her mother, and a small group of believers gathered in the church. The atmosphere was heavy, filled with the anticipation of a spiritual battle. Pastor Obinna stood at the front, his voice firm as he led them in prayer. Adana clutched the necklace tightly, her fingers trembling. The once beautiful gift now felt cold and lifeless in her hand, as if it carried its own weight of evil. As the prayers grew more intense, the pendant began to heat up, searing her palm. She dropped it with a gasp, and the sound of it hitting the ground echoed unnaturally through the room. Pastor Obinna pointed at the necklace. "This is the source of her suffering," he declared, "and it will not leave without a fight." Back in her compound, Mama Amara sat in her secret room, surrounded by her tools of witchcraft. She had sensed a shift in the spiritual realm. Her grip on Adana's life was slipping, and she could feel the prayers working against her. Lighting candles and chanting incantations, she called upon her dark forces. The flames flickered wildly, and the air grew thick with an unseen presence. She closed her eyes, envisioning the church where Adana knelt. With a wicked smile, she sent forth a spiritual attack, hoping to disrupt the session and reclaim her control. As Pastor Obinna prayed over Adana, a sudden gust of wind blew through the church, extinguishing the candles and shaking the windows. The congregation gasped, but the pastor remained steady. "Do not fear," he shouted. "This is the work of darkness, but it cannot prevail." Adana began to shake uncontrollably, her body racked with chills. She felt as though an invisible force was pressing down on her chest, trying to silence her. Suddenly, she let out a loud cry, her voice filled with anguish. "She's here!" Adana screamed, her voice echoing unnaturally. "Mama Amara is here!" The pastor's eyes narrowed. He raised his voice, calling upon the power of God to break the connection between Adana and the dark forces. The congregation joined in, their voices rising in unison. And back in her room, Mama Amara felt the resistance growing stronger. The spirits she had relied on began to waver, their power weakening against the prayers. She clutched her chest as a sharp pain shot through her, and for the first time, fear crept into her heart. "This girl," she muttered, her voice shaking. "She's stronger than I thought." But Mama Amara wasn't ready to give up. She reached for a jar filled with black powder, a substance she had used many times to fortify her spells. With trembling hands, she began a new incantation, her voice desperate. As the prayers continued, Adana felt herself being pulled into a vision. She saw herself standing in a dark forest, the necklace glowing faintly on the ground before her. In the distance, she saw Mama Amara, her form shifting between human and snake. "You can't defeat me," Mama Amara hissed, her voice echoing through the trees. "You are nothing without me." Adana felt fear rising in her chest, but then she heard another voice, a calm, steady presence that seemed to come from within her. "You are not alone," the voice said. "You are stronger than you know." Drawing strength from the voice, Adana stepped forward and reached for the necklace. As her hand touched it, the forest around her erupted in light, and Mama Amara let out a blood-curdling scream. And back in the church, the congregation watched as Adana collapsed to the floor, unconscious. The pastor continued praying, his voice unwavering. Suddenly, the necklace on the ground began to crack, thin lines spreading across its surface like a spiderweb. In her compound, Mama Amara screamed as the jar of black powder shattered in her hands. The spirits she had called upon abandoned her, leaving her alone and vulnerable. For the first time in years, she felt powerless. Meanwhile, more people in the village began sharing their experiences with Mama Amara. Families who had suffered tragedies, businesses that had collapsed, and marriages that had fallen apart all started connecting their misfortunes to her presence. A woman named Ngozi, whose son had mysteriously fallen ill after receiving a toy from Mama Amara, spoke up during a community meeting. "She has deceived us for too long," Ngozi said, her voice trembling with anger. "We must do something before more lives are ruined." The elders of the village, once hesitant to act, began discussing how to confront Mama Amara. But fear still held them back, for they knew the extent of her powers. As the prayers in the church reached their peak, the cursed necklace on the floor gave one final glow before shattering into pieces. A dark mist rose from the fragments, swirling wildly before disappearing into thin air with a chilling wail. Adana, lying motionless on the floor, gasped for air and opened her eyes. The heaviness that had plagued her for years was gone. She felt a strange lightness in her chest, as if a great burden had been lifted. Pastor Obinna wiped his brow and knelt beside her. "You are free," he said firmly, "but this is only the beginning. The one behind this evil must be fully exposed." In her compound, Mama Amara sat slumped on the floor, trembling. She felt the full force of her power slipping away. The spirits she had relied on for so long had abandoned her, and the darkness that once protected her was now threatening to consume her. She tried to perform another ritual to regain her strength, but nothing worked. The candles wouldn't light, her chants fell flat, and her tools seemed lifeless. "What is happening?" she whispered, fear lacing her voice. Her eldest son, Chuka, watched her warily from the doorway. "Mother," he said hesitantly, "the villagers are talking. They're saying you're the reason for their misfortunes. They're planning to confront you." Mama Amara's heart raced. For years she had hidden behind her charm and her fake piety, but now her carefully constructed facade was crumbling. The news of Adana's deliverance spread quickly through Amegbo. People began visiting her family to share their own stories of hardship, many of which pointed back to Mama Amara. "My son's accident happened the week after she gave him that bracelet," one man said. "She gave me a cooking pot as a wedding gift, and my marriage fell apart within months," a woman added. The elders of the village, who had long turned a blind eye to Mama Amara's strange behavior, finally decided to take action. A meeting was called, and nearly everyone in the village attended. "We can no longer ignore this," said Elder Ease, the village head. "Too many lives have been ruined. We must confront her and demand answers." Sensing that her time was running out, Mama Amara decided to make one final attempt to regain her power. She visited an old, abandoned shrine deep in the forest, a place she had avoided for years due to its dangerous reputation. Carrying the remnants of her shattered tools, she knelt before the shrine and began to chant. "Spirits of the Ancient Ones," she pleaded, "hear me, restore my strength, and help me crush my enemies." But the forest remained silent. The air around her grew colder, and she began to feel an overwhelming sense of dread. For the first time, Mama Amara realized she was truly alone. Meanwhile, Adana was slowly regaining her strength. Though she was free from the curse, the years of suffering had left deep scars. She spent her days praying and reflecting, determined to rebuild her life. "I won't let this define me," she told her mother one evening. "I have lost so much, but I'll find my way again." Mama Nkechi smiled proudly. "You are stronger than you know, my daughter, and now the truth will set us all free." One fateful morning, a group of villagers, led by Elder Ease and Pastor Obinna, marched to Mama Amara's compound. They were determined to face her and demand answers for the years of pain she had caused. "Mama Amara," Elder Eze called out, his voice firm, "come out and face us." Mama Amara, weak and desperate, stepped outside. She looked nothing like the confident, cheerful woman the villagers had once known. Her eyes were sunken, her face pale, and her hands trembled as she clutched the doorframe. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elder Ease stepped forward. "We know what you've done. The curses, the tragedies. You have ruined too many lives. It's time for the truth." The crowd murmured in agreement, their anger and pain finally bubbling to the surface. Mama Amara looked around, her once friendly neighbors now glaring at her with suspicion and contempt. "I did nothing wrong," she said weakly, trying to defend herself, but the villagers were no longer fooled. As Pastor Obinna began to pray aloud, Mama Amara let out a sudden scream. Her body convulsed, and she fell to the ground. The villagers watched in shock as her voice changed, deep and guttural, confessing deeds she had never meant to reveal. "I cursed them all," she wailed. "I couldn't stand their happiness while my children failed. I wanted them to suffer as I had suffered." The crowd gasped, and some people began to cry as the weight of her confession sank in. But Mama Amara wasn't finished. Even in her weakened state, she vowed revenge. "You think this is the end?" she spat, her eyes blazing. "You will regret turning against me." A sudden clap of thunder echoed through the sky, and dark clouds began to gather over the village. The crowd, now terrified, began to scatter, but Pastor Abinna stood firm. "This is her last stand," he declared. "We must not give in to fear